Expensive marine failures during my last cruise, which was just before the hurricane season set in, really spoilt my joy of sailing and my wallet for that month. I was planning to leave for a 150-mile voyage to Guadeloupe and checked out a few things on the boat. It's a Beneteau 323 called Golden Haze, berthed in the Marin, Martinique. All went well until I tested the anchor windlass, and it worked on down but not on up. As anchoring half a dozen times on the way to Guadeloupe and back was unavoidable, I called in the local experts at Caribe Marine, and a young, knowledgeable French electrician came on board and removed the rusting mass of electric motor from below the windlass, which was clearly never going to run again. Now, my Beneteau 323 Golden Haze is 20 years old this year, and I have to accept that more and more of the original fittings are going to fail. The problem with my 20-year-old windlass was that the small 750-watt electric motor no longer existed, and the only electric motor available was a 1,000-watt, and that didn't fit my windlass. The chandlers in Martinique quoted an astronomical price for a new windlass, so I hit the internet and I found a suitable replacement at SVB, the German online chandlers. They offered to courier it to me within 4 to 5 weeks for €25, or for 160 euros they would get it to me within 10 days. Actually, it arrived within a week. As SVB dispatch European 20% VAT-free, and the import duty in Martinique is only 17%, it was a great deal. If you're in the Caribbean or anywhere in the world, they'll send locally expensive items to you free of VAT. All you have to do is pay the import duty, and even that could be avoided if you're a yacht in transit. Now, I know I sound like an advert for SVB, but actually I have no relationship with them other than as a customer in the Caribbean. With the new windlass fitted and the new, more powerful electric motor purring away, I set sail for my first overnight anchorage in the north of Martinique in Saint-Pierre, a happier but poorer sailor. Pretty uneventful, except when I closed the land to enter the bay, the wind dropped, so I started the motor. Ahead of me was a patch of Sargassum weed floating, and as it was only a few meters wide, I decided I would motor through it. Big mistake. The engine revs dropped off to just a few hundred, and the boat speed reduced to less than 1 knot. This was my first experience of being in a patch of Sargassum, and it was a worry. I assumed the weed was wrapping round the prop and was too much for the rope cutter. I tried putting her briefly in astern, and that certainly got the revs back up. I then put her ahead at almost full throttle, and she surged forward, making a few feet progress, then stopping as the revs dropped off again. I was concerned about the raw water intake getting blocked, but even with the revs at only a few hundred, plenty of water was coming out of the exhaust. The weed wasn't blocking the water inlet, and the engine was not overheating, so I spent the best part of an hour pushing the boat through the weed by going astern to free the prop and then going fast ahead until she stopped. Big Sargasso learning curve. If there's no wind, even if a patch is only a few meters wide, I think you should make a 90-degree alteration of course and go around the patch. Finally, I got into Saint-Pierre Bay and I anchored up in 6 meters. The next morning, I was up at dawn and underway making coffee as I went. The passage from Saint-Pierre to Prince Rupert Bay is around 55 miles, with few other anchoring options on the west coast of Dominica. There was a fair amount of wind between the islands, and with this and the swell, not much in the way of Sargasso. Good reaching sail under main and jenny, and the wind only dropped as I entered the shelter of Prince Rupert Bay. It was approaching sunset as I positioned the CQR out on the end of the roller and headed for my favourite anchoring spot near the mouth of Indian River. Watching the depth sounder, I slowly motored into the 6-metre line and pressed the down button on the cockpit anchor windlass control, watching the cable ties I use as length markers go out over the roller. Then a white tie went over, followed by the end of the train. I'd lost my anchor. The C connector that I'd used to extend the length of my anchor chain had failed. To say I was horror-struck to be at sunset in a bay with no anchor would be an understatement. But anyway, you can see the full story of this incident in my previous video, imaginatively entitled Anchor Lost, Chain Broke. Fortunately, I'd kept the old Danforth type anchor that had come with Bolton Hayes when I purchased her, and as the sun dropped over the horizon, I was able to use that anchor for the night. The next morning, I set off on the last short 40-mile leg to Guadeloupe.
Well, this little jaunt from Dominica to Guadeloupe has turned into be a bit more exciting than I intended, really. Most of the time, it's coming off a bit now. Most of the time I've had around 30 knots on the beam, coming and going with rain squalls. Oh, here we go. Yeah. And in the squalls, of course, it pipes up a bit. Very rocky and rolly because the weather is absolutely on the beam. I'm making 6 knots under reefed in headsail. Boat's been absolutely on her ear a couple of times. It's not often I'm reefing. It's the rain squalls, I guess. When they come in, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know where the wind changes direction and it either pipes up like stink or drops away or whatever, and fresh water falls out of the sky, enabling you to clean the cockpit. Anyway, it's now 10:47. I've got an ETA of 1:30 in Guadeloupe. That will be just outside the marina. And I guess in the next hour or so it will tend to calm down a bit as I get within the maybe the land sucking up the wind a bit, and a little bit of lee from the eastern side of Guadeloupe, though it looks like it's quite a long way. Certainly isn't sailing gently. It's been quite breathtaking, and I'm knackered from yesterday. All that time I spent on the anchor when I just arrived, when I lost my anchor totally and had to dig another one out. Well, another one, the only other one, out from the very, very bottom of this huge locker. So that wasn't fun. But anyway, 10:48, ETA 13:40, 1400, depending on what the clock's saying. So that's it. I'm going to sit down and see if I can doze off again.
2-year-old Rainstorm Evolution Autopilot started jumping out of gear. This had happened occasionally before, but now it was happening every 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, after 20 years of use, I expect some systems to fail, but this was only 3 years ago that I'd purchased this Rainstorm Evolution Autopilot and had it professionally installed. So I ended up hand steering for 40 miles to Bas du Fort in Guadeloupe under the Jenny. There are a series of buoys and marks as you approach the very well protected bay, off which there is the channel into the marina. With so much wind abaft the beam, I decided to sail into the bay and then start the engine, then fill the Jenny, then put out my fenders and warps. It was pretty gusty as I blew in. I started the engine, let the jib sheet go, and started to reef in on the bow furler. It wouldn't budge. Nada. I just couldn't move it. Interesting situation. 25 knots, smallish bay, furling gear jammed, with over half the Jenny out. I tried letting out a bit more and then reefing in again, which worked a little bit. I slackened off the halyard a smidgen, and that seemed to help a bit too. So for half an hour, with the Autopilot now AWOL, I messed around, slacking off the Jenny furling line, then winching it in more, and I confess at this stage, I considered letting the full sail drop totally. But without the autopilot working so I could hold her into the wind, I was afraid it would drop into the sea and be under the boat before I could recover it. Anyway, eventually I got the sail filled in loosely and I put out fenders and warps and I motored into Bas du Fort Marina. Got an answer from the berthing master immediately, and from his mobo he tied the line onto the mooring buoy as I went astern onto the pontoon. Checked in on the computer in the marina office, which was pretty straightforward with the customs, and I booked in at the office for 3 nights at €30 a night. So there I was, in a strange marina, without an anchor, a headsail furling gear that didn't work, and a 3-year-old marine autopilot not working. So I did the only possible thing. I went out to dinner in the excellent Pirate restaurant, and I had a couple of glasses of wine. Next morning, I went to the boatyard where the riggers' GPS rigging services are located, and the boss, Jean-Paul Lever, promised to come over to the boat after lunch. I was delighted. I went next door to the electronics company, Fred Marine, about the autopilot, and they said they'd come in the following day or Friday. The Chandler's U-Ship also have a shop in the boatyard and really helped with advising on the best replacement anchor I could afford of a type that I liked. Delta seemed to be the way to go. Unfortunately, U-Ship didn't have the size I needed in stock, but amazingly and very generously pointed me to another Chandler, a competitor, who happened to have a selection of Lumar anchors called Delta in their window. I purchased a slightly oversized Delta at a small discount. With a marina trolley, I got it back to the boat and I shackled it on, replacing the small spare Danforth into the bottom of the locker. After lunch, the riggers came round and Jean-Paul went to the masthead and reported that the top roller furling was shot and the inner forestay was damaged. The top roller was discontinued as it was a 20-year-old furling stay, but he said he had a feeling that he might have one in stock from years back and that he would have a look just in case he did. He WhatsApped me half an hour later to say he had found one which I could have for €400. He then gave me the option of installing an entire new modern system or fixing the existing one. So I went for the repair. The next morning, 2 of his riggers came over, dropped the headsail and secured the mast with halyards down to the foredeck before removing the forestay and furling gear and walking it round to the boatyard, which is next door to the marina. Immediately after lunch, they returned and spent the afternoon and following morning hoisting the repaired furling gear with its new forestay and top roller back into place and setting up all my rigging. I was impressed by their speed and efficiency. That afternoon, The electronics guy turned up to look at the Raymarine Evolution Autopilot. He got it off the wheel, opened it up, tightened up the screws holding the clutch mechanism, and it seemed to work okay in the marina, but he warned me I would probably need a whole new wheel assembly in the future. Ouch. He said that if it started to jump out again on the way back, then a quick solution was to tie a line around the clutch lever and fix it tight so the lever wouldn't release the clutch. I'd have to untie the line in order to release the lever when I wanted to hand steer again. The forecast was very light winds for the next morning, so I went into the office, paid for the extra night, cleared customs, and next morning set sail southward bound for Dominica.
Okay, so I'm on my way out of Guadeloupe after a really eventful trip getting here. And I'm very glad the events all happened going in that direction into Guadeloupe and going that way into Martinique. Because Guadeloupe is like it's absolutely brilliant little place. The big difference with it is that people from all around the island and people from the capital and people come into that marina area in order to go to the restaurants, the cafes, the bars. It's a very vibrant place that is not just sailing. It isn't just sailing people, it isn't just boaty people, and it isn't just tourists. It's got lots of local people, and it's got an atmosphere and a vibe that I thought was absolutely brilliant. And the marina itself is so well run. Bar du Fort, I suppose, base of the fort, probably, it's a superb marina. Beautifully run, very well organised, so friendly, so nice, and the skills there are amazing. I mean, the trip out here was not good. Hey, if we ever get there, the ETA is about 5 o'clock. I'm motor sailing into 6 or 7 knots apparent, which really isn't any good to anybody. I've just got the main up. Filled up with fuel. But Guadeloupe itself, Guadeloupe Marina, I mean, in Martinique, those tradespeople, buying an anchor would have been a nightmare because the prices there for stuff is really exorbitant, whereas the prices in Guadeloupe are, yes, they're more than Europe, but then the stuff has to be shipped in, so that's fine, I can live with that. But there are 4, maybe 5 chandelier shops virtually next door to each other, and very friendly, very easygoing. So that's it. Had nice meals out, great restaurant called The Pirate, a 19 euros 90 cents menu, 3-course menu, superb meal, absolutely superb meal. That seems to be the best deal in town, actually. I did look for other restaurants, and I ended up eating there 3 nights in a row to celebrate my little voyage to Guadeloupe, Pointe-à-Pitre, Bastille Fort. And I've got a feeling I'm going to have more to say about that in the future. So, end of spiel. See you guys.
Of course, I hadn't looked at the precipitation forecast, and as I cleared the shallows into open sea, the heavens opened up with tropical rainstorms and squalls of up to 35 knots. The autopilot immediately jumped out of gear. It had reacted far too slowly as she came up into the wind. The good news was that the restored furling gear worked perfectly, and I was able to reef the Jenny easily and get her balanced and back onto course. The rain was so heavy I could no longer visually see the Saints, Guadeloupe or Dominica. So I looked at the chart plotter and saw that the chart had disappeared and that the screen was locked. This had happened to me once before off Furler in the rain. When it gets wet, the touchscreen defaults to lock and none of the touch controls work. I mean, not a dreadful situation, as I knew the course was 187 and the compass was unaffected by the rain. The problem was the Rainstorm Autopilot wasn't keeping engaged for more than a few seconds, as it was totally incapable of coping with gusty conditions. With no functioning autopilot, I didn't want to let go of the wheel in order to open the locker and find a bit of line to tie up the clutch lever. But, like many of us, I use a bungee to secure the cockpit table and stop it flopping about when I'm at sea. It's got metal hooks on either end, and the hook fitted perfectly over the clutch lever, and with the other end secured, I could still easily release the lever and put it back on course when the very slow motor of the autopilot failed to do so. The Rainstorm Evolution Autopilot was still struggling to control the boat's direction. Its reaction time in squalls was far too slow, despite being in cruiser mode, and simply not powerful enough. The little electric motor was even starting to overheat. In the pouring rain, I turned my attention to the Rainstorm ES78 hybrid touch multifunction chart display. Because the rain had caused the screen to lock in the home position, and because I had wet hands, I couldn't adjust anything on the screen. Fortunately, the manual multifunction knob allowed me to change the screen to navigate, and I got the chart plotter screen up again. The knob allowed me to set a new course for Prince Rupert Bay, although it's a very crude and difficult control to operate in a lumpy sea. Having got Golden Haze back on course and properly reefed down for the situation, I was able to access the 360-page instruction manual built into the plotter display and read up on how to unlock the touchscreen controls. So far, so good. Like all marine software, the controls and instructions are not intuitive, and I really wonder how a company which has such an extensive range of electronic products can have such badly written software. Anyway, I got the screen unlocked, only to discover that because my hands were wet, it wouldn't recognize my fingers, and that the cursor would frequently jump to lock when a raindrop landed on the screen. The touchscreen of the Rainstorm ES78 and their new Axiom display touchscreen don't work if your fingers are wet. If it's raining or if your fingers are cold, the touchscreen doesn't work. A Rainstorm display screen, apparently designed for use in the cockpit of a sailing boat, is inoperable in the cold or the wet. Brilliant. And anyway, whilst I'm having a rant about how awful Rainstorm products are, the autopilot's also useless in anything except calm conditions. The problem appears to be the electric motor. It's simply not man enough for the job. It's too small and it runs too slowly. It runs far too slowly in cruiser mode or racing mode even to control a fin-keeled sailboat when she's knocked off course by a wave or a gust which makes her head up. I mean, it's fine for motoring in rivers or lakes, but it's simply not for seagoing craft or in any sort of weather. My touchscreen was installed in 2020 and the autopilot in 2022. Neither was cheap and both were correctly installed by professionals, and frankly, neither is really fit for purpose. Okay, it's the end of the rant. But it does make me sad that admittedly a company that manufactures a bit of the Woolworths end of marine instruments can be so careless with the safety and well-being of their customers. Their products don't do what it says on the box. Next time I'll buy quality products from Furuno or Simrad, Brooks & Gatehouse or Garmin. Years ago, 20, 30 years ago, I discovered that a British company called NASA, NASA, sells similar products at half the price of Raymarine. Excellent, simple to operate marine equipment. It doesn't look as stylish as they do, but they do what it says on the box. I rigged my Angus Primrose Moody 36 with all NASA wind, depth and speed instruments. And I sailed her from the UK to the Med, where I got as far as Turkey, across the Atlantic, through the Caribbean, all the way up to the Chesapeake on the east coast of the USA, and the NASA instruments never let me down or needed fixing. Anyway, I don't have a deal with NASA either, and they're not paying me to promote them. I sailed on into Prince Rupert Bay, dropped the new Delta anchor, which dug in perfectly. The rain stopped, and I stripped off my wet clothes, all of them. It's not clickbait, I assure you. One of the joys of the Caribbean is that when it rains warm water, and you really don't need much in the way of clothing anyway. I made this video partly to confirm that sailing, as a hobby, requires the ability to stand under pouring rain for hours on end, tearing up £50 notes and enjoying it. Fair winds. Bye. My library of digital sailing books is at gentlesailing.com, so you can buy them as instant downloads. There's a link to a printer who can convert them to hard copy if that's what you prefer. I've just totally updated and republished French Canal Routes to the Mediterranean, which is now in its 12th edition and is fully up to date with new information, charts and pictures. Recently I published Your Boat in the Sun, which proved an instant popular success. It's about where to keep your boat in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean and the costs and the logistics involved. The Atlantic Crossing Guide has become a bestseller, and it outsells most of the others, probably because it's arguably one of the most comprehensive guides to sailing to the Caribbean that's available. The Gentle Sailing Route to the Mediterranean is one of the most popular publications that I have. It describes how to coast hop all the way to Gibraltar without having to spend a night at sea. There are books about marinas in the Med, sailing in the Caribbean islands, as well as a book on simple navigation, and even a Pacific Ocean crossing guide, and a book about just living aboard a sailing boat. Anyway, it's all at gentlesailing.com. So please do pay the site a visit and browse through my publications if you have a moment. Thanks. Fair winds.